Okay, I think we've reached that bewitching hour, and I think we're about ready to start this morning. So, Chris, I will turn it over to you.
Good morning, members of the panel. We would respectfully request that we open our proceedings today with the pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And I am going to take my own recess here and turn things over to Todd and Mr. Einhorn.
Good morning. This morning we will present health care on behalf of the PSCOA. And we have with us today, we have the pleasure of having William Einhorn, he is the appointed trustee to the Pennsylvania Employee Benefits Trust Fund. He's the appointed trustee of PSCOA. But I think it's helpful if we go over a quick history of the fund, trust fund, and how it relates to the benefits that the H-1 members receive, because ultimately that's what the panel has before them, issues related to the health care benefits they receive. The trust fund itself provides medical, dental, prescription, and related benefits to over 70,000 Commonwealth employees. Now, included within that number, of course, is the approximate 10,000 members of the H-1 bargaining unit, who's represented by PSCOA. The trust fund dates back to 1988, when it was created pursuant to a declaration of trust between the Commonwealth and, at the time, AFSCME. Now, the setup of the trust fund is set up through a board. In the board, through a plan of benefits they adopt and amend from time to time, create the health care packages that become available to the eligible Commonwealth employees, in addition to the employees, the dependents, and also a critical issue that we're putting before the panel, but how the benefits relate to retirees. As I stated before, the trust was created between the Commonwealth and AFSCME, and subsequent to that, other unions have joined the trust fund, or I shouldn't say joined, but other unions now receive their benefits through the trust fund, because through collective bargaining, the Commonwealth and the other unions have agreed, either through bargaining or through interest arbitration, that their benefits would be provided through the trust. That group that was added was the H-1 bargaining unit. Now, the way that it's funded, because this is also important when we discuss things later on, is that both the Commonwealth makes contributions to the trust fund, and the employee makes contributions to the trust fund. Now, when we talk about the Commonwealth's contributions to the trust fund, we talk in terms of per employee per pay period. So there's a certain amount that this panel has jurisdiction over, a certain amount that they determine through bargaining or through an interest arbitration proceeding, what amount the Commonwealth pay from year to year. The benefits received by the H-1 bargaining unit members, and this is the distinction that we want to point out, and you'll hear later on the presentation, the importance of this, because there's a date of August 1st, 2003. And that's a date where the plan of benefits dramatically changes, whether you're hired before August 1st or after. Because if you're hired post August 1st, 2003, you're provided with the lowest cost plan, an HMO plan or a basic Blue Cross PPO plan, with limited in-network provider network, with an option for a buy-up. Now, I'm putting these general concepts in front of the panel right now, and later on we're gonna dig a little deeper into them. But I just want to point them out now. So these concepts. So basically, the employee that's hired post August 1st, 2003 is going to get the lowest level plan, and then the option to pay more to get a better plan. Now, as I said before, the trust fund itself is administered by a board. The board is made up of 9 representatives from the Commonwealth, and then there's the 9 other designated representatives are from the unions. Now, although the number of unions that participate in the trust fund has increased since the creation, AFSCME still has a significant amount of control over the makeup and direction of the board, in that it appoints 4 out of the 9 members. Then SEIU appoints the other 2, PSCOA appoints 1, UFCW appoints 1, and OPEIU appoints the remaining trustee. So you have 9 representatives from the Commonwealth, and then on the union side, the vast majority is made up of AFSCME. Now, this is another very critical point that we want the panel to understand. And this, believe me, I know this panel has vast experience not only in collective bargaining throughout the state and labor law across the state, but even dealing with the Commonwealth. But we're just trying to reinforce some things here. What I'm trying to reinforce here is that during contract negotiations in the past years, during interest arbitration proceedings that I've been involved in, the Commonwealth has stressed to the arbitration panel that you cannot affect plan design changes. And what are plan design changes? What's your co-pays? What's your deductibles? Because the trustees, under the agreement and declaration of trust, control plan design. So what becomes even more critical when this panel looks at issues, what becomes more critical in these proceedings is the fact that the panel has the authority to set the contribution rates between the respective parties and provide an employee benefit outside of the trust. And we'll get to that later because one of our proposals is to add an HRA. So a critical factor here is that the Commonwealth has always maintained plan design is not something this panel has jurisdiction over. So contribution rates and adding an additional benefit such as an HRA is something that we feel is critical. Now, I briefly introduced Mr. Einhorn earlier. At this point in time, I'd like to add Mr. Einhorn to the conversation here and move to the next slide, which is slide number 5. Mr. Einhorn, could you tell us how long you've been appointed trustee to the trust fund?
Since November of 2010.
Okay. And as a trustee, could you just highlight what your duties and responsibilities are?
As any trustee would do, oversee the operations of the fund and monitor what PEBTF staff and the task force, the executive committee of the Board of Trustees do, all within the confines of the trust agreement, which imposes a fiduciary obligation on each and every one of the 18 trustees to spend trust fund money for the sole and exclusive benefit for the participants and beneficiaries while defraying reasonable or spending administrative costs for to conduct the operations of the fund that are reasonable.
Okay. Now, prior to today's proceedings, PSCOA asked you to look at various issues surrounding the health of the trust fund in general. Is that correct?
Yes.
And prior to today, we made certain requests for information to determine the health of the trust and issues surrounding that. Is that correct?
That is my understanding.
Okay. And after receiving that information from the Commonwealth through the trust, we were able to do some analysis in trying to determine the health of the trust in general. Is that correct?
Yes, in addition to records that I have of the financial condition of the trust over the years.
Okay. So as a trustee, you also have access to financial records that are available to the public, but you have as a trustee?
Yes, that are disseminated at board meetings in which persons other than trustees attend.
Okay. And you also have access to the plan of benefits, obviously, that the trust fund provides. You're familiar with the plan of benefits?
Generally, yes.
Okay. And you're, in addition to the plan of benefits provided by the trust fund, you're also familiar with the health care provisions that are contained in the collective bargaining agreement, correct?
Yes.
All right. Now, you have looked at the contribution rates over the years of the Commonwealth, and you've looked at the contribution rates over the years for the H-1 bargaining unit members. Could you take us through what your analysis showed?
Certainly. Centering in on slide 5, looking at the plan years beginning July 1, 2013, all the way through, I took it up to March 31, 2021. I was looking at the surpluses and deficits each year that the PEBTF has experienced. And for the fiscal years ending June 30, 2014 through 2020, as you see on slide 5, there haven't been any deficits. There have only been surpluses. And for the first 9 months or so of 2021, they've experienced a $48.5 million surplus. All told, during this period of time, 7.5 plus years, $528 million in surpluses. By way of background, there were deficit years in the few years prior to those shown on this chart, mainly because of write-downs in receivables that resulted from collective bargaining negotiations with AFSCME to the tune of just about $200 million. But that is behind us, and looking forward from July 1, 2013 forward, we see $528.1 million in surpluses. Looking at the bottom line each year of the financial statements, what does the PEBTF have to satisfy its benefit obligations? And what we show on slide 6 is the fiscal year end balance on the balance sheets of the PEBTF, taking assets minus liabilities minus accrued benefit obligations, incurred but not reported claims, et cetera. And the net number, as you see, as of June 30, 2020, was $775 million. In this 5-year period of time, the net assets, after all liabilities, have grown over 100%. And I would say that the PEBTF is in a very healthy position. During this period of time, over the last 10 years, there's been a marked shift from who is paying the contributions. Now, the Commonwealth is always paying a significant contribution. I'm not going to minimize that. But over the last decade, the share of PEBTF revenue, contribution revenue, coming from employees has dramatically increased, while the Commonwealth's has decreased slightly. So at beginning of this period in 2010, 93.3% of the contribution revenue came from the Commonwealth, with 6.66% coming from employees. Not just the H-1 bargaining unit, but all the employees from the Commonwealth who participate in this fund. By the time we got to 2020, 88.7% of the contribution revenue came from the Commonwealth, with 11.32% coming from employees. And when you do that math, when you take the ending amount and divide it by the beginning amount and subtract 1, you see that the Commonwealth's percentage actually declined about 5%, while the employees' percentage increased almost 70%. In real dollars, what does that mean? Well, on slide 8, what I show is that beginning with the fiscal year July 1, 2016, the Commonwealth was contractually obligated to contribute $12,558 per year per employee. And you see there's two columns next to that, employee with a footnote 1 and employee with a footnote 2. Let's center in on that center column, employee with footnote 1. That is based upon an H-1 bargaining unit employee who has 8.5 years of seniority, which happens to be the average amount of seniority of this bargaining unit. And that employee was obligated to pay a certain percentage, at that point 1.5%, of his or her base wage, which came to $825 per year. Moving forward to the latest and the current fiscal year, 2021, that 8.5-year seniority employee, based upon his or her base wage, based upon 8.5 years of service, would now be required to pay $1,518 per year in contributions, and that's before any buy-up. And that assumes that that person is also participating in Get Healthy. So instead of paying 5% of their base wage, they're paying 2.5% of their base wage. While the Commonwealth's contribution went from $12,558 per year to $13,052 per year. Now turning to that next column, employee with a footnote 2, we have an 8.5-year employee in 2016-2017 who is making himself or herself, taking them through the longevity steps. So that by 2021, that employee having 12.5 years of service and obviously a higher base wage is paying $1,818 per year in a premium contribution. And you see that while the Commonwealth's contribution from $12,558 to $13,052 rose 3.9%, that 8.5-year seniority employee, his or her contribution rose 83.9%, and if you factor in the longevity steps, it went up 120.3%. How does that compare to the increases in their base wage? And that's the purpose of those arrows and looking at the chart to the right. From a pure general pay increase standpoint, that 8.5-year employee had a biweekly salary of $2,084.80 in 2016. In 2021, that 8.5-year employee had a base salary of $2,335.20, a 12% increase. So the wages went up 12%, but the employee contribution went up 83.9%. When you factor in the longevity, the base wage was $2,084.80 biweekly. 2021, it was $2,796.80 with the longevity steps, an increase of 34.2%, which then compares to the 120.3% increase in the PEBTF contribution. The PEBTF staff and all of the trustees, I believe, have done a very, very good job in managing the affairs of the PEBTF and providing the benefits that they do. And that's also shown, their hard work is shown in this next chart on page 9. And this looks at the trend year over year, taking a 12-month average in year 1 and looking at the cost of that, comparing it to the cost on an average, on a 12-month rolling average basis in year 2.
So just take us back in you talk about trends and costs. Or what are we talking about here? We've moved from contribution levels to the benefits, correct?
We're now talking about the cost of benefits.
The cost of the trust is paying to provide benefits.
Correct.
Okay. So to pay the doctors, to pay the hospitals, et cetera.
Yes.
Okay.
So as a simple example, suppose it costs you $1 in year 1 and it costs you $1.50 in year 2. Well, your trend would be 50%.
Okay.
Because it's costing you 50% more in the second year than it did in the first year. year-over-year trend. While the marketplace, and I should say that I serve on several trust funds as a trustee, so I'm familiar with benefit costs generally. The marketplace in this area, based upon surveys by Willis Towers Watson, the fund's actuary, based upon Buck, based upon Siegel, based upon Aon, all the major houses, that marketplace shows year-over-year trends of about 7%. And I'm talking pre-COVID now. During that same period of time...
Just so we're clear, so from year to year, they're saying that the cost of providing the benefits, paying the doctors, paying the hospitals,
and prescription drugs.
Right. It averages 7% higher every year. So that dollar is $1.07, right?
Yes.
Okay.
PEBTF, instead of having a 7% trend, has had trends much lower than that. For example, in August of 19, when you're looking at the period of the 12-month average ending August of 19 and comparing it to the 12-month period ending August of 18, the trends were less than 1%, 0.7. And you see that throughout this, you don't see trends any higher than 2%. And marketplace trends are about 6 or 7%, especially in prescription drugs. Then with the COVID experience that we've all experienced beginning in March of last year, you see that the trends dropped dramatically. Well, there was a reason for that. People couldn't go to the doctor. They couldn't go to the dentist. Elective surgeries were postponed. Wellness visits were postponed. Routine care was postponed. So when it was postponed, it wasn't incurred. When it wasn't incurred, it wasn't, obviously, there was no cost. So the trends went negative at that point. And now as we're emerging out of COVID, you see that the trends are, again, jumping up. But they are not jumping up above that red line, which is a 0% trend. I would expect that it's going to go above the red line. It's a question of how quickly and how fast. But based upon the pre-COVID experience, that first part of the chart, you see that the PEBTF has experienced much lower trends than other plans generally. One thing that the trustees are presented with and what has been provided by the Commonwealth as part of a request for information for this proceeding are the number of months in reserves that PEBTF has. And in January of 17, the PEBTF had 5.4 months.
Bill, let me slow you down a little bit. So why don't you kind of give us, like, when you talk about months in reserves, what's the concept here that why are we looking at this?
If contributions stop, no further income, how long can the PEBTF continue to provide those benefits with no contribution income coming in?
And this is something that the trust fund looks at? It's an indicator that they analyze regularly?
Every meeting.
Is this an indicator that other trust funds review on a regular basis?
Yes.
Okay.
Generally not as frequent as the PEBTF.
Okay.
And in 2017, if everything stopped, the PEBTF had enough money to continue the benefits for 5.5 months, 5.4 months. That steadily increased. It rose to 7 months, and by March of 21, it stood at 8.2 months in reserve. There's a certain significance to that because there are provisions both in the trust agreement and in the plan, as well as in the collective bargaining agreement, that speak of certain months of reserves and what can and should happen if that level is reached. And the minimum amount of reserves that the trustees administer the plan under is 3 months. And as you see, the PEBTF has greatly exceeded that by almost threefold.
Now, you talked about the trust document, the trust, or the collective bargaining provisions dealing with reserves, but the number of months in reserves is whether there's a provision in the trust agreement, whether there's a provision in the collective bargaining agreement. This trust fund, other trust funds look at this because it's indicative of the health of the trust fund. Correct?
That is correct. Because you never know, and pardon the expression, you never know when the poop is going to hit the fan. I mentioned the contractual provisions with respect to reserves, and what's germane here is Article 23, Section 3C of the collective bargaining agreement between the Commonwealth and PSCOA. It's set forth on page 11, and basically, if the fund's actuary certifies that a 3-month reserve of projected claims and expenses has been achieved and will be maintained for at least 6 months, the trustees can evaluate, it says the trustees will evaluate whether employee cost sharing for employees hired before August 1, 2003 can be reduced or eliminated, provided that at no time shall any such reduction or elimination of cost sharing result in the reserve being reduced below the 3 months of total projected claims and expenses. I can tell you that in my 10 years serving as a trustee of the PEBTF, this provision has never been activated by the PEBTF trustees.
Do you know how, I mean, in your previous chart, you talked about reserves going back at least until January 2017, above 3 months. Do you have any recollection as prior to that whether they were above 3 months?
They were.
Okay. But we know at the very least, based upon this presentation, that they've been above 3 months for 4+ years, correct?
That is correct. The slide 12 shows the actuary's projection, and again, this, although it's shared with trustees in executive session, this was also shared with me through a request for information coming from the Commonwealth that was filed by PSCOA. The actuary projects, one of his tasks is to project the number of months in reserve the fund will have at a given point in time. That given point in time generally is the expiration of the AFSCME agreement, since many agreements are tied to that same date, and the employees and the contributions are tied to that specific date. So, for example, in July of 2019, the actuary predicted and projected that as of June 30, 2023, 4 years out, the fund would have 3.6 months in reserve. Obviously, the closer you get to that point in time, the more accurate the projections will be. And that's shown on this chart because look at September of 2019, the actuary predicted that as of June 30, 2023, the fund would have 3.8 months in reserve. As we go through the chart, you see that as of September 2020, the actuary projected that 2.5 years into the future, the fund would have 4.2 months in reserve. And now, one of the latest projections by the actuary, as the projection that was made March of 2021, 2 years before June 30 of 2023, he's predicting that as of June 30, 2023, the fund will have 6.4 months in reserve. So clearly the fund has more than 3 months in reserve, and it's going to be lasting longer than 6 months. So I guess my point is, as a trustee, I feel very comfortable getting this information and looking at this information and say, okay, we have a healthy fund that is managing the benefits very well, that has more than targeted reserves, continues to build surpluses, and otherwise all the indicators are very good.
The PSCOA, in addition to looking at the financial health of the trust fund, we also asked you to discuss plan of benefits and the effects of those plan of benefits on the H-1 bargaining unit members. And you're now going to get into those slides now and give us a presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
Earlier it was mentioned that there's a differentiation between those hired before August 1 and those hired on or after August 1 of 2003. From a benefit perspective, those hired prior to August 1, 2003 automatically received the top benefit plan, which is, at the present time, is the Aetna Choice PPO. Also, should that member have a working spouse, and that working spouse's employer provides coverage, they will take it if they don't have to pay for it. And the PEBTF will be secondary, will provide secondary coverage for that working spouse. But if they have to pay for it, or if they are financially incentivized not to take it by their employer, they don't have to take it. And the PEBTF would be primary for that spouse. That's very different from a situation of an employee who was hired after August 1, 2003. Keep in mind that the average seniority of an H-1 bargaining unit member is 8.5 years. So I would suspect that the vast majority, perhaps 70 or 80% or 75, at least 75% of the bargaining unit was hired after August 1, 2003. With respect to those people, they get an HMO, the Aetna HMO, or the Geisinger HMO if they're in that area of the country. But they can also opt for a basic PPO through Highmark that has a $1,500 deductible per person, $3,000 family deductible. Or they can buy up, as I'll discuss in a minute, to that Aetna PPO Choice program that has a $400, $800 family deductible. But unlike the spouse, the working spouse of someone hired prior to 8/1/2003, that working spouse of an employee hired after August 1, 2003, who was working and is offered coverage, has to take that coverage, cannot decline it if they are financially incentivized, and still must take it if they have to pay for it. And the fund would remain secondary. And each year, the PEBTF, generally each year, and they're going through it now, sends out what's called a spousal attestation form that has to be filled out, where the spouse, the member and the spouse are attesting to coverage, if any, that the working spouse has or could enjoy. I mentioned the buy-up. For employees hired on or after August 1, 2003, there's no buy-up charge for the HMO or the basic PPO coverage. That has a limited network, especially with respect to UPMC in the western part of the state. They can also, they have the option to buy up to the Aetna Choice PPO at an annual cost for single coverage of $338 and an annual coverage for family just under $873. That's in addition to the premium contribution that I spoke of earlier. What we saw when we looked at this was that in addition to the 84 to 120% increase in their premium, there have been changes to other out-of-pocket expenses under the PEBTF program for H-1 bargaining unit members and other bargaining unit members of other unions who enjoy coverage under PEBTF. The medical deductibles in 2017 under the Aetna, the top plan, were $300 per person, $600 per family. They went from $400 to $800. That's a 33% increase. The basic PPO plan went from $1,000 per person to $1,500 per person. That's a 50% increase. There have been increases in the emergency room copay of about 33%, and prescription drug copays have increased anywhere from 50 to 100% during that period of time. I would also mention that under the benefit plan and the ACA, the out-of-pocket maximums that a family can have under the PEBTF program can be as high as $17,100 per year, and that is in addition to the premium contribution that we spoke of earlier. The next couple slides, 16, 17, and 18, are snapshots from the PEBTF website that show the coverage levels under the various programs, the PPO Choice, the PPO Basic, and the HMO. And as you can see there from about the second and third line down, you see the deductibles and the out-of-pocket maximums that I just testified to.
And now we talked earlier, you talked about it, I talked about the plan design. In the plan design, the Commonwealth always taking the position that the plan design was not bargainable. And this is what we're talking about. So as the trust fund adjusts deductibles or doctor copays, those are things that the Commonwealth takes the position aren't bargainable, correct?
They've taken that position, yes.
Okay.
Skipping through to page 19, when we talk about high out-of-pocket expense, and we talk about perhaps as high as $17,100, that's just on the medical side. That doesn't include out-of-pocket for dental expenses. And that can represent a very large exposure for a bargaining unit member and his or her family. On page 19, we see a snapshot from page 99 of the PEBTF summary plan description, which describes the dental PPO coverage. Understand that this is in-network and out-of-network coverage. In-network, they're paying what's called a maximum allowable cost. So, for example, the dentist may have a published fee of $100 for a service, but the maximum allowable cost may only be $53, okay? The fund's benefit is based upon that $53, not on the provider's charge. And depending upon the type of service it is, they may be paying 100% of that $53 or 60% of that $53 or 90% of that $53. It depends upon what type of surgery or what type of dental procedure it is. And of that maximum allowable cost, there's a benefit limit of $1,500 per person per year. So it's not $1,500 of the charges. It's $1,500 of the aggregate maximum allowable cost for whatever dental procedures that patient had that year. There is also orthodontia coverage with a lifetime maximum of $1,750 that is paid at 70% of the maximum allowable charge up to that lifetime maximum of $1,750. What does all this mean in real dollars?
And just so we back up, now again, when we talk about the medical plan design that's not bargainable, the same thing with the dental. The plan of benefit, the plan design for dental is not bargainable.
That's correct.
Okay.
Now, if you go to an out-of-network dentist, you can do that. However, that dentist may charge $80, and the maximum allowable cost is only $53. And if the fund, because of that level of service, was only paying 90%, they may only pay $48 of that $80 that out-of-network dentist is charging. So in addition to that difference between 48 and 53, the patient could also be responsible for being balance billed by that dental provider, the difference between the $80 and the $53. Okay? One thing I did not mention is, on top of all this, there's also a $50 deductible per year. So the plan's not going to pay anything until that deductible is satisfied. Now, what does that mean? What does all this mean? What I tried to show on page 20 is some of the more routine or common dental procedures and what a member would be responsible for on out-of-pocket. The top part of that chart is where the member is using an in-network provider, and the lower part is an out-of-network provider. And you see that there are three main columns there: Pittsburgh area, Harrisburg area, Philadelphia area. Dental allowances can vary by region, by zip code. And there's a service called the National Dental Advisory Service Pricing Program, and that's what I used, the 2021 edition, in coming up with these figures. Now, there's the third column from the left shows coverage percentage. If you go and you have a filling done, the fund is going to pay 90% of the maximum allowable cost. The participant will be responsible for any deductible, the $50 deductible, and the difference, that other 10%. I'm assuming in this analysis that the $50 was already satisfied somewhere else, okay? And the maximum allowable cost column represents the 50th percentile of charges by dentists in that particular three-digit zip code. Why did I choose 50%? Generally speaking, United Concordia and Delta Dental hover around the 50th percentile for their in-network providers. So in this case, the in-network provider would be reimbursed $228 for that filling based upon a maximum allowable cost of $253 and a coverage of 90%, and the member would pay $25. Skip down several rows to orthodonture. In Pittsburgh, the maximum allowable cost would hover around $5,636 for an orthodontic case, a full 24-month braces, retainer, the shooting match. The fund would pay $1,750, and the member would have an out-of-pocket of $3,886 in that situation. And you see how it varies from the Pittsburgh area to the Harrisburg area to the Philadelphia area. So in Philadelphia, that member would have an out-of-pocket of about $4,363 for that orthodonture case. Many of the SCIs are located in rural areas. And Pennsylvania is a very rural state. And many of the H-1 bargaining unit members would live in the proximity of the SCI in a rural area where there are a limited number of providers who may or may not participate as PPO participating providers. In that case, generally speaking, non-PPO providers generally base their charges in the 80th percentile range, not the 50th percentile range. So while the fund would still pay the same amount because it's based upon the maximum allowable cost for an in-network provider at the 50th percentile rate, the member could be balance billed for the difference between that 80th percentile charge and the 50th percentile charge, plus whatever 10% or 40% that the fund isn't paying of the maximum allowable cost. So you see that, for example, in the case of Pittsburgh area for a non-participating orthodontist, instead of having an out-of-pocket of $3,886, the member could be facing an out-of-pocket of $4,282. In Philadelphia, instead of $4,363 out-of-pocket, it would be $4,792. I did the same analysis with respect to fillings, extractions, upper and lower dentures, crowns, a 3-unit fixed bridge where you're capping 2 teeth and have a fake tooth in the middle, root canal, and orthodontia. Right?
Thank you.
I was asked, well, how is there a mechanism by which some of these out-of-pocket costs can be reimbursed? And since 2002, through the process of collective bargaining, many bargaining units have been successful in negotiating a health reimbursement arrangement. It finds as its genesis IRS Notice 2002-45 and 2002-28. An HRA is paid solely by the employer and not pursuant to a salary reduction. It reimburses the employee for medical care expenses that are defined in Section 213D of the Code. And if it's not used in 1 year, it's not a user or lose it. It can roll over into the next year, be added to additional contributions for that following year, and even carried into retirement. But it must be for medical and dental expenses, and that each expense submitted for reimbursement must be substantiated. Paid receipt, for example. The types of expenses that could be covered and reimbursed through an HRA are set forth on slide 22. This comes from IRS publication 502, and you see that I've highlighted coinsurance for medical, dental, or vision, co-payments, deductibles, a vast array of medical and dental expenses and vision expenses that could be reimbursed through the HRA. Finally, I was asked to just do a quick down and dirty calculation of the retiree contribution to PEBTF for post-employment retiree medical coverage. And I used the example of an active employee with 20 years of service and a retired employee who just completed 20 years of service and is retiring. That active employee with 20 years of service has a taxable base pay of $78,198 per year. Assuming that they are participating in Get Healthy, they would be making a premium contribution of $1,955. With respect to a retired employee, their final average salary calculation, which includes average base pay, shift differential, overtime, that could be $92,815. And I think I used average overtime of about 5 hours per week, 260 hours per year. And I think the latest response to a request for information indicated that in 2020, the average overtime was about 222 hours. So we were very close in that assumption. So that employee, this retiree, would be getting 50% of that 92,815. So his or her taxable benefit based upon a single life benefit would be $46,408. They are paying 3% on the final average pay without regard to the shift differential and overtime, and that would be about $2,346. That represents 5.1% of the $46,408 of what the employee is taxed on. My understanding of the PSCOA's proposal is that it should be 3% on the single life accrued benefit before any lump sum withdrawal or reduction for joint survivor benefit. So if that single life benefit was $46,408 per year, 3% of that is $1,392.
Thank you. What we believe has been presented this morning and what we are asking this panel to consider is our healthcare proposals and the information that we've provided you today. What has the information mostly provided by the trust and reviewed by Mr. Einhorn and presented today, what has that shown? We believe that that clearly shows that the trust fund revenues and reserves are still financially strong, despite contribution holidays and givebacks, despite other matters that the trust fund took. It just clearly shows revenues and reserves are not only good presently, but projected to be in great shape moving forward. The evidence that we presented today also clearly shows that the Commonwealth versus the employee contributions, it shows that the H-1 bargaining unit members have paid more and the Commonwealth pays proportionately less. We also believe the evidence shows that the trust fund plan design changes since 2017 have created more out-of-pocket and paycheck expenses for the employees in the H-1 bargaining unit member. So what are these factors, and what does this data provide the panel, and what do they lead to the following conclusions that we're asking? The employee contribution rate should stay the same. The evidence here clearly points to that. The evidence also here establishes the fact that an HRA of $2,000 is clearly needed. With out-of-pocket expenses continuing to rise, and those out-of-pocket expenses are not bargainable. They're part of the plan design. The HRA is the one thing that these H-1 bargaining unit can use to combat the rising costs that are outside of the bargaining. The other thing that we think this panel needs to look at is Article 23, Section 3C. Now, that's the provision that says that contribution levels should be reevaluated if reserves are 3+ months. And the evidence has clearly showed that there's been 3+ months of reserves for a long time here. And that contractual provision has never been triggered. The last thing we think that the evidence shows and the panel should clearly look at is that the maintenance of jurisdiction regarding the impact of the changes to benefits should be renewed. You can clearly show here, the evidence has clearly shown here that although the contribution level of the Commonwealth has increased 6.9%, the contribution level for the H-1 bargaining unit members has substantiated over 100%. And it's time for the panel to start looking at areas that they can address that are within their jurisdiction. And because there's no jurisdiction over plan design, we strongly urge the panel to consider the HRA here. And we strongly urge the panel to keep employee contribution rates at the same. So with that being said, that concludes our presentation. We would give both the Commonwealth and the panel the opportunity to ask questions at this time.
I would just ask for a really short break, maybe 5 or 10 minutes if possible.
Okay, we'll take a 10-minute break. Let's come in about 5 after 11. Okay, I think we're about ready to start now. If you take your seats.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Pat.
Bill, you last time in this proceeding, the last interest arbitration, you were one of the arbitrators, correct?
That's correct.
What happened? You couldn't cut it, or do you believe this is a promotion to be a witness or an arbitrator, or what happened?
Eric beat me out. What can I tell you?
And if you want to have a table in between, because I know you were an arbitrator, you're a witness, we can move your table up. I don't know what your status is here today. So a couple questions, and maybe this one.
I'm here as a witness today.
Okay, thank you. If we can go to the last slide, I think it's 24, Todd, if you don't mind. Oh, we're still on there, okay. And this is either for you or Todd, if somebody can help me. The maintenance of jurisdiction regarding the impact of changes to benefits, that number 4 bullet point. Is that in the proposals? Because I couldn't find that one in the proposals, even the latest version. And this isn't a stump the band question, but when I was going through that.
No, it's just a continuation.
It's just a continuation of what's in the contract, yeah. I mean, there's not the specific proposals regarding health care
Okay,
will be
I knew the
presented.
specific, I reviewed those, and I couldn't find a proposal referring to putting, are we talking about putting this language back in that was removed by the previous panel? Is that what we're talking about?
What language?
Language dealing with maintenance of jurisdiction regarding the impact of changes to benefits,
Well, the proposals were provided. The proposals are the proposals, yeah.
right? Okay.
I don't know what else to say. And maybe I'm confused by your question.
No, are we talking about putting language back in the actual contract? Is that the proposal, number 4, maintenance of jurisdiction regarding the impact of changes to benefits?
We're proposing to keep the existing language as is, and our proposals are laid out, listed. I don't,
Okay, all right, we're operating on different. So, Bill, let me ask you a couple questions here if I can. You went through a bunch of slides on the dental, and do you, as a trustee, we have 9 union trustees, 9 Commonwealth trustees, correct, sir?
That's correct.
Okay, and as trustees in your fiduciary duty, the PEBTF trustees set the level of benefits regarding health, prescription, dental, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and the OOP, the out-of-pocket for dental, do you guys review that as part of doing that? Review that periodically or every year?
There is no out-of-pocket maximum for dental. The dental program, like other programs, is put out to bid periodically. But if you're asking, is there a regular analysis of what the out-of-pocket experience of the average member is, there is not.
So you guys don't look at any figures like what the average out-of-pocket is for prescription, medical? You don't get any figures like that or review any
No,
figures like that?
do not.
Because I'm of the understanding that the board does review those. You don't get any analysis of that?
I do not.
You don't?
Perhaps that is done at task force and is not shared with the rest of the board at the regular meetings.
Because when we're talking about the HRA proposal you have here for the $2,000 for each member, and that's a pretty hefty proposal, right? We're talking 10,700 times 2,000 over 21 million. In reviewing and asking for that, was there any analysis of what the average out-of-pocket is for this unit?
I was not tasked to do that, and I do not believe there was a request for information for that information.
Okay, so you weren't tasked to do it as part of this proceeding, and as a PEBTF trustee, you haven't done that either, looked at the
Not on
average-
dental, no.
Not on dental. How about on medical?
Well, on the medical, there is an out-of-pocket maximum of $17,100.
Right.
That's part and parcel of the ACA, in addition to the deductibles and
Okay,
co-insurance.
we know that, but what I'm asking about is there any analysis, and you've already answered this, there's no analysis, to your knowledge, of the average out-of-pocket that of each member? There's no analysis of that by PEBTF trustees?
Not that has been shared with me, no.
Can we go back to slide 3? Bill, can you help me with slide 3? Because you have in the second bullet point, with relatively few exceptions, each individual participant in the PEBTF also makes contributions to the fund, which are deducted from their pay. So here's what I wanted you to clarify for me, if you can. I'm of the understanding that all the covered employees in the PEBTF make the same contribution. And you say with relatively few exceptions. I just don't know what that
There
means.
are some bargaining units that are technically not Commonwealth employees, they're agency employees, and I am not sure whether or not they have the same contribution rate or any at all.
And who are these people, to your knowledge? I'm not sure who you're referring to.
I can't list the agencies off the top of my head, but
Okay. Can we go to slide 5 next, Todd, if you don't mind? So Bill, you talk in this slide about a write-down. Isn't it more accurate that the PEBTF didn't write down, rather there were agreements with the majority of the unions to defer during the Great Recession due to the economic effects of the recession?
no, this is language that was used in the notes to the audited financial statements of the PEBTF.
Now, if you can take me next to slide 7, Todd. So, Bill, you're talking about the increase in employee contributions here, correct?
Proportionately, yes.
Right. And we would expect this as more and more, as we get past more and more employees hired past 8103, correct? I mean, with the language of the contract and the language of the documents here.
Only with respect to buy-ups.
And if we look
That's
at this,
not the reason for the increase. That's not the major reason for the increase. Reason for the increase is that employee contributions went from 1.5% of base pay to 2.5% of base pay during this period of time. And with respect to those who didn't participate in Get Healthy, it went from 3% of base pay up to 5% of base pay.
okay, and then you're aware that the last agreement, negotiated agreement between the Commonwealth and this unit was a 1-year agreement, correct?
Correct.
And in that agreement, it was agreed by and between the parties to increase the contribution, I believe, from 2.25 to 2.5. Correct?
That is my understanding.
And that was in a negotiated agreement.
Yes.
Okay. This chart here shows that over the years that you've listed, the Commonwealth is paying $180 million more than it did in 2010 in the PEBTF, correct?
Roughly, yes.
Okay. And it shows at the same time the employees are paying roughly $64 million more, is that correct?
Yes.
Slide 9, if you could, Todd. So, Bill, you talked about this, but I just want to talk a little bit more if you could. So we had the probably maybe the lowest usage ever during the pandemic due to doctors' offices being closed, dentists' offices being closed, and people not going out.
And generally that was the case in many benefit plans.
Right. I mean, across the whole country, right? I mean,
Yes.
the whole country was shut down, and people were using appropriate discretion and not going out, not going to doctors during all this. Has the trust looked at, I mean, because, and you said we're going to get back up above this red line, has the trust looked at how soon or how soon usage is going to increase? I mean, because obviously we're in a much better time now. I mean, when I was driving in this morning, I saw a sign at I think it's the Rite Aid on the corner saying, walk-in vaccinations available. And this is the first time, I don't know, Bill, if you've been out much, but first time I've been out among a bunch of people. And we're back, and doctors' offices are opening, and people are rescheduling appointments. And has the PEBTF looked at how rapidly that's going to happen? And these numbers, we're going to get back above the red line.
Yes.
What have you guys found, or what have you guys seen?
Keep in mind, as I testified, the PEBTF actuary doesn't look at just the past, but projects forward, and is projecting forward and continually projects forward for over a 2-year period of time from today.
I get that, but I mean, you would agree with me that with the low usage during the pandemic, the 100-year pandemic, we're at a historical low usage period, and we're probably going to be at an historical ramp up of people scheduling the appointments and getting back. Has the actuary looked at how soon that's going to happen and when it's going to happen? I know we have a 2-year lookout, but
I can only testify to the information that's given to us as trustees. He's looking forward and factors that into his projections.
right. How about
And if, now, I'm not an actuary, you're not an actuary, but common sense says that you would look at the pre-pandemic period, okay, to measure what you might expect post-pandemic. Because on a relative basis, if you have a negative 4% trend, you know, and then all of a sudden people start coming back, relatively speaking, it's going to be a much higher percentage because you're starting off from
Right.
a lower point.
But don't we, Bill, we also have the concern, though, and hopefully we have the concern of people that didn't do the preventative care because they couldn't and didn't get the cancer checkups and didn't get, so there's concerns that this surplus could go down pretty rapidly, too, because we'll have a lot of people that contracted diseases or cancers because they couldn't do the preventative care. That would be part of the analysis, too. Correct?
It is part of the analysis because that's what the actuary factors in making those projections going ahead 2 years. What will be the financial status or stature or status of this fund June 30, 2023, and right now we're in May of 2021. And that actuary takes into account, as he has explained to the trustees, not only the benefit structure and what they anticipate the cost to be, but also utilization.
Let's go to 19 if we could, Todd. Now, Bill, you went through a lot with the dental. Help me out with this. Isn't it true that the trustees made plan design enhancements to dental and vision benefits in 2020?
Yes.
Also,
It might have been 19.
Okay. And there was also some other enhancements, I believe, diabetes prevention, a rollout of telemedicine, a change to the waiting periods. Do you recall those?
Yes.
I think that is all I have. Thank you, sir.
Quite welcome.
We're okay here. We don't have any more questions. So.
I just wanted to clarify one point, if I could, if the panel doesn't have any questions. Bill, I just want to make clear, because when you talked about trends and the health of the trust and moving forward, what position the trust is going to be in, and the focus was just recently your testimony on trends, but when you look at slide 12, when you just testified that the actuary, and this is the trust's actuary, when they're doing their analysis, they're looking at what the contributions are going to be from the employer and the employee, correct?
Yes.
They look at the plan design for the benefits, correct?
That is correct.
They look at trend, correct?
Yes.
Utilization, right?
Utilization is a very important factor.
Right. All that's looked at, and this data is not stale if you consider March of 2021. That's a recent analysis by the actuary, correct?
Yes.
So as of...
And although it's reported to the trustees at their bi-monthly meetings, the actuary performs an analysis just about, it's my understanding, each and every month.
So what was the latest data that was provided to us pursuant to our request for information is provided at slide 12 when it says the actuary, when he's looking at contribution rates, benefits provided, utilization, trends, he's looking at all those things, and the trust actuary is saying as of March 2021, he projects 6.4 months in reserves 2 years out. That sounds pretty healthy to me.
That's fact.
Okay.
I testify as to fact. As I said, I'm not an actuary.
Thank you, Bill. There's no further questions for Mr. Einhorn unless the Commonwealth or the panel has any follow-up.
We do not.
We don't either. Thank you, Bill, very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
If we could just take one more 5-minute recess, we'll get our next set of witnesses up, and we will begin working on the last bit of our proposals.
Okay, so let's not go too far. We're just taking a 5-minute break here. Okay, Chris, are you ready to resume?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Before we begin testimony, if I could just ask the panel to turn back to slide 23 of Mr. Einhorn's presentation. Our proposal on the retiree health contribution here really has to do with the changes from going from being a wage earner to a fixed income. And when you look at these numbers, you're paying 2.5% of an income that you're continuing to earn, and you have the ability to continue to earn more. And as soon as you retire under the current system, you are paying more as a percentage of your take-home, of your now fixed income, than you were previously when you were working. And that number represents 5.1% for that particular employee. And what we're trying to do is cost containment for our retirees who don't get a COLA, who are on a fixed income, and certainly don't need to be spending even more money on health care, especially when we have a fund that is rich as it is. Now, the Commonwealth has made a proposal to revert to the annual retiree rate being 3% of final average salary, including overtime and shift differential. And what that means, and I'll just ask you to note this on your slide. If you look at that bottom left, retiree employee, 20 years of service, their premium contribution under the Commonwealth's proposal would be $2,784, making their premium contribution 5.9% of their fixed income. And when it comes down to the end of the day here, we should certainly not be making folks who have a fixed income pay even more than what they would have paid when they were actually working. So with that, we'll begin. And excuse me, the intent of these proposals now is to highlight and address the proposals that we don't believe have already been covered by some other testimony or an expert already. Our first proposal, and we'll actually we're going to handle the medical proposals, and then we will go through the contract start to finish again. But Article 23, Section 3D, we're looking to eliminate this subsection. And President Eckenrode, can you explain what it is that you want and why?
We're asking for this. We're asking for this article to be eliminated. This provision of the contract is it hinders new employees coming in, and we feel that the new employee should be receiving the same amount of benefit that they could receive after the 6-month period. We would ask that this be eliminated from the contract.
And eliminating this 6-month waiting period incentivizes employees or increases your recruitment.
Absolutely.
Okay, so maybe one of those 8,000 people that they have on standby eligible to become a H-1 bargaining unit member would actually take the job.
Right, and we have, according to the Commonwealth's testimony, 8,000 people in the waiting pool to be interviewed for H-1 positions. But as it stood yesterday, we actually have 399 H-1 vacancies across the Commonwealth.
Okay. And Article 23, Section 3D2, our proposal is listed as to amend this subsection to provide for this benefit for all bargaining unit members. But essentially, this proposal is to eliminate that same 6-month waiting period.
Yes, that is correct. The way that we have the proposal written up on the sheet, if I'm looking at the same sheet you are, we just want to clarify, and then to remove the 6-month waiting period outright.
And this is for not just the basic set of benefits, but the supplemental benefits that come through the fund.
Correct.
Okay. Now, if I understand it correctly, PBTF has independently removed at least 3 months of those waiting period.
That is correct.
Now, has the Commonwealth come to you and said, hey, let's amend your contract and change that 6 months to 3 months?
No, they have not.
Okay. Article 23, we're looking for a new subsection here. What is the PSCOA looking for and why?
We are asking that full spousal and dependent benefits under Article 23 be afforded to survivors or dependents that are left behind after a member's passing. Unfortunately, I'm sure everybody in this room has experienced some form of death in their lifetime. Hopefully, you were not the person that has experienced death of a spouse, and especially it's very burdensome on spouses and dependents when the person that passes is the breadwinner of the family, which in most cases for our membership, not always, but most cases, When a member passes, they are the breadwinner for the family. They are the person that provides the benefit. As it stands today, if you pass at noon today, you lose your benefits. Your spouse, your dependents lose those benefits as of midnight the day that you pass. And we feel that this is so important that we took it upon ourselves as an association. I want to say, and I could be off a little bit on my timing, a year ago we created a policy that the PSCOA Executive Board voted on to provide a COBRA benefit for spouses and dependents for members that have passed for a period of 30 days.
And we're not talking about service-connected deaths, we're talking about strictly non-service connected deaths.
Yes.
Okay. And according to a records request from the Commonwealth in the 1920 fiscal year, our H-1 bargaining unit lost 14 members to non-service connected deaths.
I believe that number's 11. I don't think it was 14.
Was
I
that-
could be wrong.
Your 11 is from 20 to 21, that was from July 1st, 20 until now.
Yes.
Is an additional 11 members.
Yes.
So from July 1st of 2019 through the present, we're looking about 25 people.
Correct.
Okay. And to clarify for the panel, this would be essentially COBRA benefits for those spouses and dependents that were already covered at the time of death. We're not looking for benefits for some other individual. It's those folks who would be losing their benefits midnight the day that their provider died. Moving on, and this is where we'll kind of restart with the contract here. Article 9, Section 1, we are proposing to add 4 additional days that are recognized as holidays. Mr. King, can you explain what we're looking for here and why?
Sure. Back in, I believe it was the 90s, we actually had Election Day was a holiday and was bargained way through contract, and we'd like to see that brought back due to the...
Pretty important to most of your members who are also carrying DD-214s.
That is correct. We have a very vast majority of members are veterans.
Okay. How about the bargaining unit member's birthday?
So who doesn't love a birthday? And, you know, a majority of our members do work their birthdays. They may not have the day off. They have to be here. And just a little to give back to the member for his service to the Commonwealth Department and being in the institutions and the hospitals and the centers on their birthdays.
Okay. Now, moving forward to Article 9, Section 6, which kind of ties in with that same article. We're asking to amend this section to provide where a special holiday is declared, that day shall be treated as if it were an Article 9, Section 1 holiday. And historically, we don't get a lot of special holidays. Last year was one of those historical blips for Juneteenth. And it was declared on June 18th for June 19th. Can you tell the panel what kind of headache it ended up causing for your members in terms of how it was being applied?
Absolutely. So with this article and section and that holiday in particular, when they declared the special holiday, no two institutions were handling it the same way. Some members found out prior to the end of their shift they were forced off the next morning or the following day for their shift due to maybe the job assignment they had or their actual their classification perhaps. It created leave code nightmares across the state for our members who assumed it would be a certain leave code, then a leave code was changed, or the leave code should have been changed and it wasn't changed. And to streamline it and make it solid and clear for the entire bargaining unit, that's why we're asking that this be considered to fall in line with Article 9, Section 1.
Okay. So why, in the previous proposal, though, are you asking for Juneteenth? What's changed that you now think it's not just going to be another special holiday declaration?
I believe that it will, with the governor's declaration, that will be considered a state holiday.
On a regular basis?
On a regular, yearly basis, yes.
Okay. Article 10, Section 1, moving into leaves. Hank, could you explain this proposal and the background as to why we're looking for this change?
Yes. We're looking to amend this section, all material subparts with language that permits all bargaining unit members, regardless of service, to utilize their sick leave for personal illness that results in 3 or more days off. So in the history of the bargaining unit, back in the contract year of 1998 and 2001 with ASME, it was required that a doctor's note had to be brought in after 3 days of sickness. So all this time, while having to bring in a doctor's note for 3 days of sickness, now we can't even get into our sick leave the way the contract language is now until we're out more than 5 days. Kind of doesn't make sense. If I'm forced to go get a doctor's note for 3 days of being out 3 days sick, why can't I use my sick leave? That's what it's there for bringing in a doctor's note. So we're trying to clean up that language in the contract so it goes together that says if I have to bring in a doctor's note, I should be able to use my sick leave also.
Your contract also provides, based on the member's years of service, that some of those first 5 days aren't even going to be converted back to sick leave.
Yes, that's correct. There's a breakdown and an incentive as you get more senior. You're able to have your sick leave go back and be used by certain days. After you're out more than 5 days, depending on your years of service, you can go back to day one. But for the majority of the bargaining unit, it doesn't. We just want it to go back to day one. You bring in a doctor's note, you go back to day one, you're able to use your sick leave. Plain and simple. I think that would make it simple for everybody on both sides.
An additional Article 10, Section 1 proposal is to eliminate language regarding mandates, a regimented set of treatment, and also the examples that are listed in the contract. Why do you want to eliminate that?
There still seems to be issues with institutions carrying it different ways on what a regimented treatment is and bringing in the doctors. We have plenty of arbitration wins already for what regimented treatment is. The way it's written in the contract now, many institutions or many people believe that it has to be those exact examples that are in the institution, in the contract and quoted that way. So we just want to make it that any licensed healthcare professional or can provide a certification that that's what it is, and it's good for any reason as long as it's provided by that doctor.
Understood. Article 10, Section 16, we are proposing to include the niece and nephew as qualifying individuals for bereavement leave. To be clarified that this is a 3-day qualifying event as opposed to a 5-day. What brought about this actual proposal?
Well, two things. On a personal level, I know that in my family unit, my personal family unit, my nieces and nephews are very dear to me. And unfortunately, if we were to suffer a loss in that, a niece or nephew, I know personally I would be devastated. I would need some time off of work, number one. Number two, the recently, I believe it was 2019, my date might be off, the recent ASME contract under Article 14, Article 14 includes nieces and nephews in their sick bereavement language.
Article 10, Section 19. Mark, we're looking to remove the requirement of the initial 15 days in order to utilize long-term sick. Is there a difference between sick leave and long-term sick?
It's the same.
Okay. So in this particular instance, we're talking about not our own illness, but
A
whose
family
illnesses?
member's illness.
Okay. So what is it we're looking for and why?
Currently, the contract states where a family member's serious health condition requires the employee's absence from work beyond 15 days, 112.5 or 120 hours is applicable in a calendar year. Permanent employees with 1 year lease of service may use accrued sick leave. What we're proposing is to amend all material subsections of 19 to remove the requirement of the initial 15 days in order to utilize long-term sick. What we're saying is if a member has a family member that has a serious health condition that is documented by a medical professional, that they would be allowed to use their sick leave starting on day one and not have to go into use their vacation leave of 15 days before they can get into their sick leave.
And if I understand the language of the contract correctly, outside of strictly Section 19, or its subsections actually state that if you don't have enough combined leave, you're meant to take no leave at all. Go
Correct.
without pay.
Correct.
And if you happen to have a family member that's been sick longer than 15 days, then you can get into your sick leave.
Correct. From a personal situation, I had my father who had cancer, and I was required every day to take him for chemotherapy. Well, the first 15 days in that instance came out of my vacation time until I was able to go ahead and get into my sick leave for my father's serious health condition.
Right. And I suppose if we grant these kinds of proposals regarding using sick leave for your own sickness or for your family sickness, we probably wouldn't have as much sick leave at the end of the day to buy back when you retire. But I'll just leave that as an anecdote. Article 11, Section 1. Hank, we're looking to amend and replace with language that provides for a universal stress day benefit. Can you tell us why? Because last time we were here before Arbitrator Lowe, we came with a stress day proposal. The Commonwealth had a similar stress day proposal. We got language. Why are we asking for this again?
Yeah, unfortunately, that language didn't work out very well. There was too many disagreements between how it should be applied. We ended up going back to arbitration. As a matter of fact, I believe it was Arbitrator Miles, if I'm not mistaken, and we had to have it written over again. Not only that, even after the arbitration, we had problems with who to pay. Like, there was some disagreements there. So it turned into a very lengthy process after the contract language that we got, and it was really discombobulated. I think to make it easy on both sides, once again, is just give everybody a stress day. Just say that they all get one stress day. Trying to say that you had to have less than 2 CNs and making an incentive to it. I'm going to be honest with you. We had lots of members who had less than 5 years during this COVID time that didn't earn a stress day because of what happened the previous year. And during COVID was probably some of the most stressful times there could have been, that they could have used that stress day. It would have been nice to be able to get that off.
We would draw the panel's attention to tab 2 here. Arbitrator Lowe, I'm sure you remember issuing the award for this contract back in 2017. It took us until November of 2019 to even fix applying what you had given us. And then even after that, it wasn't cleared up. And so what we're looking for is to make it abundantly easy and abundantly clear for everybody. Article 15, Section 3.1. John, we have a number of committees that you are allowed to bring folks down to Harrisburg and pay UB time. What are you looking to do in terms of an addition here, and why?
We are asking that the panel establish 2 new committees. We're asking for a PSCOA Honor Guard Committee and a Memorial Committee. The purpose of the Honor Guard would be to attend funerals for members that have passed. In 2020, and this is where I came up with that number 11, there were 11 H-1 members that would have been eligible for a PSCOA Honor Guard at their viewing funeral. With the exception of any overtime that may be needed to backfill for a committee member that is deployed. The overall cost of the committee falls to the PSCOA. Uniforms would be purchased and maintained by the association. Travel and possible lodging expenses would also be paid for by the PSCOA. The issue of potential overtime is already recognized by the Commonwealth. Commonwealth Honor Guard teams have been deployed to past events, not only inside of the Commonwealth but also outside, and they recognize the need to backfill at times for deployed members, and they incurred the cost of that over time. The Memorial Committee would be established to recognize past members on the anniversary of their passing by establishing contact with surviving spouses and dependents, mailing remembrance cards, flowers arrangements, and possibly attend a yearly following event with the Correctional Peace Officers Association.
Article 18, Section 3A. Aaron, what are we actually looking for here, and why does it come about that you are looking for this?
So what we're looking with this article and section is that when our members are working, they work a 10 work day and a 14-day pay period, 10 days, 4 days off. So their second and fourth day, they work their first and third days off are considered double time. With pandemics, as we learned, members were working vast amounts of overtime due to members being out sick. So they very well, some members may have gone 45, 60 days before they seen a past day or a regularly scheduled day off. So we would like our members compensated for all time after that when their past days are incurred, that it would be paid at the double time rate.
This is also a motivation for the Commonwealth really to make sure that your members are getting their days off.
Sure, absolutely. With any monies that have to be put out, you would take a fiscal responsibility to ensure that you don't overspend, and therefore your members and your employees are taken care of and have that time off to regroup and recuperate.
Article 18, Section 4. John, tell us a little bit about your proposal for compensatory time.
Basically, we're asking that the panel amend the language in Article 18, Section 4 by eliminating the requirement of all three parties to be in mutual agreement for the compensatory time. As it stands right now, it requires the employer, the association, and the member to all be in agreement for a member that works overtime to be compensated with compensatory time. Currently, in the Department of Corrections, there are 11 institutions that have mutually agreed upon side agreements that allow members to choose compensatory time in lieu of overtime pay. And I believe those agreements are in our binder. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes.
And I can't refer to the tab right now. I don't have the binder in front of me.
There should be two of them there in front of you.
It's in tab 3.
Tab 3.
There are also two separate articles in the current H-1 collective bargaining agreement that allow employees to earn compensatory time without a mutual side agreement. They are Article 9, Section 8 of the holiday section, where it reads about past practice at each institution/boot camp and in the Department of Corrections concerning the granting of compensatory time off earned as a result of working overtime or working a holiday shall continue. And also under Article 18, Section 5K8, in overtime section, it reads, however, if an employee receives a third and subsequent voucher during the 6-month voluntary overtime period, the employee may choose to redeem the voucher for compensatory time. So we already established in the collective bargaining agreement there is room for comp for compensatory time. We would ask that that be expanded to where it does not require three parties to be in mutual agreement.
So we have all of these agreements that exist already. Why don't we just rely on the locals to get an agreement?
I know that out of the rest of the locals that do not have agreements right now, have in the past or are currently seeking to obtain an agreement, and the Department of Corrections, OA, has left it up to the local superintendents whether they agree to sign or participate in an agreement. And the institutions that do not have mutual agreements as of right now or because we can't reach an agreement with the respective other side.
Okay. And if we look through each of one of these agreements, I would presume that they're different.
Yes, they are different. There's some parameters that were put in place in most of the agreements on the amount of comp time that you can incur in bank. Off the top of my head, I believe that number relatively across the board is somewhere around 120 hours.
Okay. Because of timing, and I know that they're setting up lunch, I want to pause at this time. If there's any questions on the proposals up to this point from either the other side or the panel, and then we could resume after lunch.
We don't have any questions here either, Chris.
All right, we'll keep moving. Article 18, Section 5B, we're looking to add a new section. Aaron, why are you looking for double time when working on a mandate, double time for a mandate on an enumerated holiday?
So this would be, we're looking for this a little more incentive-based, if you would think about it. Our members work holidays, they work weekends. So we'll take a 2 to 10 member, for instance, working Christmas. He or she may have Christmas morning set aside for the family because they know they're going in 2 to 10. Unfortunately, sometimes things happen and that does not always work out. So our members do get mandated. And over the last 3 years, there was our holidays, obviously, 2 years, with the COVID pandemic, there was an uptick in mandates in general, and a vast majority of them occurring throughout the holiday season. So therefore, this to us is more incentive-based. It is a holiday, it is an enumerated holiday. Our members are losing family time, and we would like to see them compensated for it.
So we've provided as part of our materials on the slideshow the number of employees being mandated, which everybody can see. Aaron, when you're called for a mandate, what allows a person, or what justification does a person have to say, I can't come in, or I'm not coming in, without being disciplined for violating an order?
So contractually, it does call for a request to be excused for a reasonable request. However, there's nothing solidified. So our members do not ask to be excused. They work the mandate for fear of repercussions.
Okay. So if you simply have plans with your family at home on Christmas morning, that's probably not going to be sufficient.
That would not be a good sufficient reason, no.
Okay. Article 18, Section 5B7. We're also looking to add a new subsection here. Aaron, explain this new subsection and why we need this here.
Absolutely. So as a result, in our collective bargaining agreement, as a result of an improper mandate, when that is found, the member is entitled to then, which would be a double time rate of pay for the improper mandate. Now he or she was already compensated at time and a half for the mandate because it is overtime. So therefore they receive the half time for all the hours worked. However, the dilemma we find is if a member works his or her first pass day, putting them in time and a half, their second day obviously would be double time. So the member gets mandated on their second day off. And as you come to find, it then became improper. Because it's their second day, they're already compensated at double time, so there's no penalty for the improper mandate at that point on the second day off because the member is already being compensated at double time because he or she already worked their first day off. So the only way to rectify that situation and put some onus back on the commission officers or whoever is hiring the overtime and making sure it's done correctly would be to instill a penalty.
All right. Article 18, Section 5C. Mark, we're looking at eliminating language that the Commonwealth asked for our last contract cycle. And this is language that was meant to be for your safety. Why would you want to eliminate this?
Currently, the Commonwealth has come to the PSCOA and asked us to waive that section in the contract to allow members to work in excess of 2 double shifts on 2 consecutive days. It's something that will lessen the amount of mandates on the collective bargaining unit of the H-1 unit and allow a member who wants to volunteer to work that time. They're volunteering to work instead of being mandated. When you're mandated, it causes childcare issues at home. It causes issues with your daily life. So what we're asking for is if a member volunteers to work in excess, that they be allowed to.
Okay, so to clarify this proposal, we want to maintain that limitation to keep people from being mandated beyond that double.
Correct.
But consistent with what's going on right now, that if members are willing to work in excess of the double, let them do it voluntarily.
Correct.
Okay. And that we have in our arbitration book at tab 4 the correspondence indicating that from May of last year, where essentially the pandemic was really taking off and taking its grips on the Commonwealth, when we relaxed this standard and started allowing that.
Correct.
Okay. Article 18, Section 5C, we're looking for an additional language here. Mark, what is it that we're looking for and why?
What we're looking to do is we're looking to propose to amend to include the following language: where a bargaining unit member is mandated from the job site, the mandated shift must be for the shift starting immediately thereafter or soon, or shall begin no sooner than 8 hours following the end of their scheduled shift. Currently, and I'm going to use an 8 to 4 officer for an example. An 8 to 4 officer, they have been experiencing mandates on the 10 to 6 shift. These members are forced to go home if they can, if they live close enough to the institution. With the recent prison closures we've been experiencing, members are now forced, their 30-minute commute that they had prior is now an hour and a half, 2 hours. So they would have to try to go home and report back to work for the 10 to 6 shift, and then wait in the parking lot, to go back into work. So what happens is if a member works 8 to 4, they have to wait from 1600 to 2200, work 10 to 6, then again wait 06 to 0800, and then work 08 to 1600. If you do the math, that comes up to 32 hours without any type of reasonable health-sustaining sleep, causing not only a safe condition inside the prison for the staff members inside that prison that work there, and to the individuals on the roadway when those individuals are attempting to go home, putting a mother and her child at safety, in risk that the member might fall asleep on the way home or have an accident.
With this?
I don't believe so.
So for here, we're, again, excuse me, talking about mandates.
Correct.
Okay. So we've provided some witness statements at tab 5 about these very situations.
Correct.
Okay. Article 18, Section 5K 7A. Thank you. Hank, we're looking at eliminating essentially language that's conflicting with other parts of the contract. Could you explain this?
Yes. We have two parts of the contract that contradict each other. And we would like to see it where we eliminate the one with the 2-hour notice, and we want to go back, or the way it was originally set up, to my knowledge, of just being able to redeem your voucher prior to the overtime shift you want to work. It's bad enough already, the voucher system, really. When I turn in a voucher, all I'm doing is taking it away from another brother or sister that signed up from overtime in the voluntary overtime book. It should be, from my standpoint, in my opinion, that it should have been as an extra person there. The money was taken away in the past years during interest arbitration because they didn't want to see no free money. But it wasn't really meant to be, at least from what we thought, to replace people in a position that were already signed up and willing to do it. It was almost like an extra body would be there, but they would go and do other things. They would have to work for their money, not that they would get free money. So now, as it stands, you have institutions doing it different ways because of the language being two different ways in the contract. And what they do is, if John was signed up for overtime and Hank comes in and he hands in his voucher, John might already been hired for overtime. But all they're doing is say, oh, Hank has a voucher now, so John, you're unhired. Hank, you go work. All they did was replace John and Hank. They really didn't add to the voucher system or the overtime to the original mistake that they made to get that voucher.
Article 18, Section 5K 8A. Again, with these vouchers, Hank, can you explain to the panel, how do you actually get a voucher?
So a member gets a voucher for being skipped for overtime. I could have been voluntarily signed up, and the Commonwealth made a mistake. They skipped over me. They didn't have my numbers there. Any number of mistakes they might have made would allow me to get a voucher that I have to redeem for overtime, but I have to work that overtime.
All right. And so how often are vouchers being issued? And how often are we getting to the point where we're getting a third and subsequent voucher within a 6-month period?
Well, I believe Aaron has the numbers on the third and subsequent, but the voucher system just doesn't work. I mean, it doesn't matter to management to give anybody a voucher. Like I said earlier, they're just replacing one body with another. But I have documentation here that shows SCI Benner had 152 vouchers given out in 2020. That's 152 mistakes. And then what they do is, once again, it doesn't matter. They don't care if they give out that many because they're still getting the overtime done, but they're not thinking about the harm that was done to the member that actually did sign up and the mistake was made in the beginning, in the first place.
Okay.
With that being said,
Hank, real quick, what was that number again?
152 for Benner,
And what was the time period?
2020. I go back some years. There's some years that goes back. 2018, I'm looking at Forrester, it was 306. So the system, it's not a deterrent any longer for management to make a mistake with the voucher system. All it does, they get a body to replace a body anyway. It's no deterrent to them anyway. Now, in this part of our proposal, what happens is on the third time, the member is supposed to be able to choose compensatory time also. Another spot that John had spoke about where it's tied into our contract. However, with that compensatory time, the Commonwealth only has to pay straight time. So instead of, if I was earning, I would be getting time and a half because it's overtime that we're talking about. And compensatory time, if I choose that, I would only get the 8 straight hours. So we're asking that that compensatory time also has to be at the rate of time and a half. So in other words, 12 hours.
Okay. Article 18, Section 7, we're talking about the actual payment of overtime. Aaron, can you explain to the panel when you actually get your pay for the overtime hours that you work and the confusion that that has caused recently?
So this is all new to me with this one because I don't understand where it came from. So if I work June 1st through June 14th and I have, we'll say 14 hours of overtime in that, which is now a pay period, when the following pay period, June 15th through the 29th is the pay period, and I get paid on the 28th. On June 28th, all hours worked from June 1st through the 14th should be in that paycheck on the 28th. However, somewhere along the lines, it's being applied as the following pay period. So not the pay period that actually that followed the pay period you worked it in. It's actually another full pay period after that before you even get it. And the language should be clear.
So there's language in your contract that talks about employee option for a separate overtime check. When was?
That was actually bargained away. I believe it was 92 under the AFSCME. When we was under AFSCME, that was actually bargained away. We had lost that. So the overtime checks up until that point were separate paychecks. You got your overtime separately from your paycheck.
So let me ask you this. I assume at some point, way back when, there was somebody keeping tabs of your time by hand. And you had your regular hours that were scheduled and overtime hours were kept in a separate log.
Correct.
How are your hours in overtime logged and calculated now?
Yes, so we took away the human contact of it in the paper form and went with the SAP system, the SAP system. And how this is tracked now is basically a lieutenant, a commissioned officer, the food service manager. They log your hours in a computer on a sheet of paper, then put into a computer, then it's sent to somebody else to input. And that's actually how it's to be logged now.
Okay. And whether you're there for an 8-hour shift or there for an 8-hour shift plus an 8-hour overtime shift, all of your hours are being accounted for the same exact way.
Yes, because the system is actually set up that you're already programmed in. They know I'm on 6 to 2. So automatically the system has already created with what my days off are and my shift. So if nobody makes any entries whatsoever the entire pay period, it's automatically going to generate my paycheck at the end of the pay period that I worked 80 hours. And then everything else is manually input through the system by clerical staff or a commissioned officer.
Okay. So you want your overtime pay in the same paycheck that you earned it?
Absolutely.
Okay. Next section, Article 18, Section 7. We're now looking for a penalty for missed payments. Why?
Again, if there is no real penalty for mistakes, then how do we correct anything? How do we make it better for our members? Again, we need to put the onus back on the Commonwealth, the managers that are responsible for inputting this time. We should not have to wait for monies owed to us, and we understand that unfortunately mistakes do happen. However, there has to be consequences for it.
If you find out today you haven't been properly paid, how much time do you have to file a grievance or else lose that money, period?
So, with that being said, you have 15 contractual days from the date of your occurrence to file your grievance. However, not every member will know right away until they get their paycheck whether they were violated or not.
Okay. So, but you have 15 days
Yes.
from the occurrence or your knowledge of the occurrence?
Yes.
If the Commonwealth found out that they overpaid you 3 years ago, When do they start taking money out of your check?
You typically get a letter if you're lucky, however, maybe an email, but that usually goes within the next pay period.
Okay. Next article, 29, Section 3, amend the subsection to provide for a clothing allowance for all bargaining unit members, which right now would simply just add the CCC monitors. Do CCC monitors have a uniform or some sort of standard of clothing that they would need a clothing allowance for?
They do.
Okay, can you tell us what they actually have to wear, what the expectations are?
Well, they're required to wear a polo shirt that identifies them as a community corrections monitor, and a pair of nice pants, dress pants or slacks or something like that to come into work.
Okay, and we did the rough numbers of costing this out. This would be about $78,300 a year
Correct.
by adding that.
Correct.
Okay. And just going back to the proposal and the 2% penalty, if we could draw your attention to tab 6 of the binder, we do have, by comparison, an excerpt from the collective bargaining agreement for the state of Alaska, where they actually outline a fairly extensive process in terms of evaluating wage errors and how it's to be fixed and setting limits on it. Certainly a 2% penalty would be the easiest. Their process is fairly extensive in how that's actually done. So, moving on to Article 33, Section 18A. John, we're looking at expanding the bid post positions to our hospitals. Why and why does this make sense?
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to take some responsibility for this, even though I was not sitting in this seat until January the 25th. I feel that it's important for the PSCOA to come before this panel and ask for bid jobs to be extended to the hospital settings. And unfortunately, in the past, we have not afforded all the same contractual rights to the forensic security employees that work at these hospitals. And this is our attempt to try to bring them online with the rest of the H-1 membership. Even though they do work in a hospital setting, they perform the same duties along the line as corrections officers. And in the contract, it clearly states that a bid job, a bid post, is a corrections officer post. And there's no reason why that language should not be extended to also say forensic security employee. And in tab 7 of your packet, I provided a mutually agreed upon side agreement that was established at Norristown. Excuse me. It was executed November the 12th of 2015. And in that side agreement, it established bid posts that are bid by FSEs at that institution. And also in your packet, and I won't go through the whole sheet, I'll let you look at it. We identified bid posts or positions inside of Torrance and Norristown that we feel meet the bid post criteria that was established by the Cold Flesh 1 and 2 awards.
As part of that packet, we've also provided those Cold Flesh awards in terms of evaluating what bid post should be.
That is correct.
Okay.
They are in the packet.
Hank, Article 35, in terms of arbitration, we're looking to simply expand the number of arbitrators we use from 8 to 12. Why on earth do we need 12 arbitrators?
Well, recently, since our administration has taken over, we've come across a lot more grievances that are a lot more worthy of going to arbitration. The problem is step 1 and step 2 just isn't fixing it in the grievance process anymore, and we seem to be going to arbitration more and more. Recently, we just came across a couple of months of scheduling where 8 positions wasn't enough. We had to hold off and then try to reschedule them again the following month.
Okay. We also have a proposal here to amend the rules regarding scheduling of grievances. Can you explain the current process for scheduling, the time within which, for example, somebody gets disciplined to the time that they actually might get before an arbitrator, and then why we're looking for this change?
Yeah, by the time somebody actually gets disciplined, it could take up to 2 months, 2.5 months just to get to the first step of to the second step of the process. When it gets to the second step of the process, then you're talking at least another 15 days before that's filed, and then it just goes up for review on the following month. So you're adding another 1.5 months. So there's 4.5 months there. That is if the timing is perfect on everything. With that saying, an arbitrator scheduled the way it's done now is 2 months out during that process. So we're looking at up to an average of 60 months, a minimum of 6 months, just to be able to schedule an arbitration for discipline.
Okay, so what is our actual proposal?
So our proposal comes from, it's kind of some language that's in the PSTA, the Troopers Association, and what we're looking to get done here is that we don't need to sit down. PSCOA is already the moving party on the grievances. There's no need for a sit down to just schedule. We have the schedule of arbitrators already open for the whole year. We have what they've given us and chosen. We just want to be able to, if it's decided to go to arbitration, just plug them in. And we do it within 60 days, just like is in their contract.
Okay, so essentially, if it cannot be resolved at that step 2 process, you identify it going to arbitration, it gets cycled into the schedule.
That's correct.
Okay. Additional arbitration rule here, requesting a contractual language for paid administrative leave for the grievant, any testifying witnesses, and 2 local PSCOA officials. Isn't this how it already happens, or what's actually occurring here?
Unfortunately, no. This has been a gigantic headache for the association. It's my understanding that in the past, and from what I know, that they always allowed the local president and vice president to be there for bargaining unit history. It was never an issue before. When this administration came into office, the memo, and that's exactly what it is. It's only a memo. It's not a signed agreement or anything like that. There's some memo that the Commonwealth likes to use to put stipulations on how we have to get a local official there to be able to testify if necessary. That doesn't always work out. Sometimes we're not able. We get busy. There's a 2-week limit on it they want. Sometimes we may be less than 2 weeks. Now, granted, I'll admit they've always granted it to us, but they make a big deal of it. It should just be plain and simple. If we have an arbitration at an institution, we need the local officials there to be able to testify to local history. You never know what might come out of it. Sometimes I feel we're already at a disadvantage when we have an arbitration at an institution. The institution is sitting there with their laptops, their computers, any information they need. They can go back and forth. They have, who knows how many employees can come in and out of the room. On our end, we have to be specific, and we have to tell them exactly how many people are coming. And then we have to hope that they grant that administrative leave for them to come.
One of the other conditions is that they're putting on, especially the local officials, is that they'll get administrative leave as so long as they testify.
Yes, we already had an incident one time already. It came about that the testimony came out and we didn't need one of them to testify. One testified, the other one didn't. When that person went back to the institution, they tried to take that administrative leave back off him and wanted him to use a vacation day for that. However, in the long run, it was rectified, I will admit it, but it was just another annoyance of not needing to be done. We should just have the right to be able to have every president and vice president of that local be there for that local history. I must say that there was a couple other incidents, but I'll just mention one. You know, some of these arbitrations, they usually start around 10 o'clock. So we've had it already where management has forced our members to go in uniform at 6 o'clock and then go in and give them only a half hour to put on a shirt and tie and be presentable to the arbitrator at 10 o'clock because they were on the 6 o'clock shift, or vice versa, where they had to bring in and make sure they had to change to go and put on their uniform to go back in at 2 o'clock if they were a 2 to 10 employee, and it ended at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Understood. John, we're looking to amend the subsection regarding donation of leave to permit the donation of sick leave. Can you tell the panel what do you actually get from the leave donation program?
Can you clarify that question for me?
How do you get into the leave donation program in terms of a recipient?
You have to submit your name. To be completely honest with you, I've never, fortunately, had to use that benefit, so I'm not exactly sure where your name gets put, but you get put into a bank. At some point in time, an email gets generated to the employees, and they basically solicit members to donate their leave, their vacation time, to help an employee who is in either has zero time, they're in a negative leave balance at this point in time due to some kind of medical condition that's beyond their control, and they're off for an extended period of time, and they just simply ran out of leave because of the medical situation that they're in.
Okay, and right now it's strictly you can donate combined leave, your own personal vacation.
That's correct, and we are asking that that the combined leave be allowed to to continue that donation, but we would also respectfully ask that sick leave also be included in that provision.
Okay. Next, this one's pretty cut and dried. We're looking for a 3-year agreement, and also to specify that we are asking that, notwithstanding the date of the issuance of the award, that this panel issue benefits effective July 1st, 2021. Hank, we are looking for a new article regarding member rights, and this is fairly extensive. How long has the PSCOA been asking for this? Why are we asking for this? What's going on?
This has been an issue. I've been with the union since 2001, and this has been an issue ever since I was a member. I've always heard of it, whether I was on the local executive board, going all the way through the ranks to my position now. Management likes to suspend members pending investigation without doing an investigation just on going on the knowledge of what they heard or what they might have saw. They put no real investigation into it. We do have an agreement now that they have to have at least a lot of mill hearing, but even now there's still people put out suspending investigation for what we believe is not right. These individuals are put out without pay. They're on the street collecting no money, and the Commonwealth is in no rush whatsoever to do this investigation. We've had people out for 4, 5, 6 months that we've had to arbitrate both ways, not only their suspension pending investigation, but their final discipline also. In particular, bear with me for 1 second. In particular, we had a person out of Camp Hill that was suspended in June 7th of 19, ended up being terminated 6 months later, but it took 6 months. That person was out of pay, not knowing what was going to happen for 6 months. He was just put out on the street for a violation that happened inside the jail. I want to make that clear also. And not until October 5th of 2020 were we able to get that person back to work and made whole. In our eyes, the Commonwealth is putting people out of work without thinking about it or without doing the proper investigation, like I stated earlier. we believe it's okay to pull them from where they are if they don't want them in the institution, but they need to be able to still work. If they can work outside the institution, if they work in another area while this investigation's going on. I think it's twofold. I think it gives the member a fair and equitable investigation, and I think it allows, or kind of forces the hand of the Commonwealth to actually do the investigation without forgetting about it. I mean, here's a case, and there's several other cases that are like this, where they take 4, 5, 6 months before they even come around to finalizing their investigation. But there's no rush for them because the member is out, not collecting any money or any benefits, for that matter, after a certain amount of time. So we believe that if they're going to be charged with something, and they're going to be SPI'd, I should say, suspended pending investigation, for breaking a code of ethics or a DOC violation, that should be done while they are still working somewhere in the institution. They can put them on a modified duty, or they can put them somewhere, but they still have the opportunity to work. We do fully understand the governor's code of conduct and them being SPI'd for that.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about Part D and Part E of this request. The Commonwealth has its own security offices in each institution that conduct administrative interviews. The Commonwealth also has the Bureau of Intelligence and Investigations, which is a police unit under the governor's jurisdiction. Most of them are not actually police officers with no formal police training. They're more or less deputized by the governor. But what they're doing is they're coming into the institution during work hours for an employee, having the institution bring the employee down to the security office during their shift, and then they proceed to interview them. And they won't tell them outright that it's a criminal investigation. They will at some point slide across a Miranda waiver and have them sign it and essentially start asking them questions. The problem with that tactic, which is horribly underhanded, is that if I'm at work in an institution and setting like that, there's only one way that I'm to be relieved from my job, and that's because a supervisor has said, you no longer have to be where you're at, you need to be somewhere else. So your employer is causing you to be somewhere else, i.e. the security office to be interviewed by BII. And then when you get to the security office, there's another member of line staff that says, go in there, there's some people to talk to you. It would be completely different if it was a member of the state police in uniform or a badge with a completely different setting. But BII, unfortunately, does both administrative and criminal interviews, and they blur those lines, and they have done for many years. And it's been recognized by the labor board that they've blurred those lines. But they refuse to simply state outright that they are doing a criminal investigation as opposed to an administrative investigation. And they refuse to provide additional indications that they are not actually compelled to provide answers. Because 9 times out of 10, when a member goes in to this very setting, they don't believe that they have any choice but to provide answers, even after being read Miranda warnings. And I would suggest to you, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what's going on here, but Miranda isn't even triggered until somebody is in custody. Well, when I recently asked a BII agent, why do you give Miranda, the BII agent said, well, I thought that he may not have believed he was free to go. Of course he didn't believe he was free to go. His employer just told him he had to be there and be subjected to a criminal interview. And so that's why we were asking that these members of BII, which are employees of the Commonwealth and are subject to this bargaining process as members of the DOC, should be compelled to provide more forthright information. The next thing here is with respect to Part E. We have unfortunately seen a number of individuals be held out of work on suspension pending investigation for far too long, only to find out that there was very little actually done in their case, or that most of the information was known at the outset of their case, but they kept them out until they could essentially get around to it. And that's horribly improper. And when you consider the rules and the regulations and the timeliness of actions and the onus that's placed on our members to do things correctly on a timely basis, it's not improper to ask that the Commonwealth have a time frame within which they're supposed to be investigating complaints and issuing adjudication. It goes to the basic tenets of just cause. So our last two proposals here actually have to do with housekeeping. Mark, with respect to our panel of arbitrators for heart and lung, with the retirement of Lynn Mounts, we have mutually agreed upon Robert Barron. So we simply just need to correct that language in the contract?
Correct. We just need to add Arbitrator Barron's name to that article and section inside the contract.
Okay. And finally, John, with respect to replacing the CUSA Corrections Conference with the, and that should actually read CPOF, not COPF, Corrections Peace Officers Foundation Project, or another correction. Wasn't this already agreed upon?
Yes, it was in the one-year contract that was signed last year.
Okay. As a matter of fact, you changed your payroll slot, removing CUSA and putting in CPOF already.
We have.
Okay. At this time, I'll open it up for a cross-exam or questions from the panel. It is the conclusion. Very well. Did you have any questions as to clarification as to our proposals? I know that's typically something you would like to do, but I think we covered them. Not at this time. Okay. Members of the panel?
Yeah, we're okay. We don't have any questions right now.
Okay. Gentlemen, we thank you for your time and your attention. I know that this has been a long week, or at least it has felt like a long week, but we appreciate your time and your attention. We appreciate this forum, and from my own personal experience in doing these over the past decade, I appreciate the level of professionalism from both the panel and the Commonwealth, where it has certainly gone sideways in years past. We have a bargaining unit here, like I said before, who had to weigh risk versus reward in coming to arbitration. And I would suggest to you that they have nothing else to lose. So the reward is already pretty high here. I know that we have a concern about a bargaining unit that has minimum qualifications to get into. But I hope over the course of the last 4 days that we have shown you, while they may have minimum qualifications, they have maximum expectations that are placed upon them. They are not the old guards of years past. They are expected to be Renaissance men and women, and that requires a corresponding package of wages and benefits that I don't think should be compared to your regular wage earners. On top of that, very few jobs in this state, this country, or this world carry with it a risk as great as it is for these members. And I would ask that you respectfully take that into consideration in fashioning your award. And I thank you.
Okay, we on the panel certainly thank everyone who's been involved, both from the management side and the union side, and from the PSCOA presenters. We appreciate what you've done, and been very enlightening.
Thank you. We rest.
Okay, we're dismissed. When do we meet back here in a couple of weeks? Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, I can't remember the dates. Yeah, okay.
I think it's 16, 17, and 18.
16, 17, 18, yep. Yeah, 16, 17, 18, okay. I don't need to remind them, they'll all know. I say I don't need to remind everybody that.